day to all you seekers, sinners, and saints tuning in from every corner of God's beautiful creation. You've landed on the Means of Grace podcast today, where we're going to be, cracking open that good old rule book to see what makes it tick and when it's time to make a change. Joining me in this divine debate, if you will, are two of the podcast's titans of theological thought, Dr. Jonathan LeMaster-Smith and Reverend John Yeager. Today, we are going to discuss together, we're going to dig deeper into the do's and don'ts that have guided and sometimes misguided faithful folks through the ages. If you're not sure who I am, I'm Jesse Ennis. I am associate pastor in the Western North Carolina Conference and also one of the hosts of the Means of Grace podcast. And it is always a pleasure to be here. So first, let's speak of unspoken rules. John?
Hey there, guys. Yeah. So unspoken rules. When we're talking about rules, there's levels. There's unspoken rules, there's written there's spoken rules, and there's written rules. And eventually there's also God's rules. But even breaking unspoken rules sometimes has an effect, including my Pittsburgh baseball team. In 1890, the Pittsburgh Alleghenies played Major League Baseball. And in 1891, there was a little bit of a turning point as the Pirates, soon to be named Pirates, stole a player from the Philadelphia A's. In fact, a couple of them, and ended up, it had never been done before. You didn't take players from another team in those days. And so the newspapers in Philadelphia started calling them pirates for breaking this unspoken rule. And that is what they are today. So my question to y'all is, what are some unspoken rules? And do they matter? They seem to have consequences.
I mean, for me, unspoken rules are always interesting. I mean, one of the things we talked about is like sort of this idea of a funeral procession and a led by usually the pastor and then the hearse and those sort of things. Like when I first became a pastor, I did not realize the pastor's car led the funeral procession. About that, I didn't know that was the tradition, the rule there. But then there's also usually a police escort in front of them. And while many people do not stop for a funeral procession, if there is a police escort for anything, you are supposed to pull over and allow the group led by the police escort, be that a funeral procession or a presidential motorcade, and let them pass as part of that.
So it's like an unspoken and written rule.
Yes, it's both out of respect and out of the law in places.
I've noticed when I was growing up, if any time you saw the funeral procession, whether there was a cop in front of it or not, you pulled over. You stopped completely. Nowadays, it's more of a gentle slowing, perhaps. In reverence, there's a reverent slowing. At best.
I think that depends on where you live, because I will live way out in the country, and people are pulling off the road, getting out of their cars, and watching sometimes still.
I agree, and now there's a mix, right? Now there's people that really completely pull over, and now there's people that just zoom right past them. It's like, yes, getting ahead of traffic. They change, right? These rules change over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say one of the more laid back, I guess, unspoken rules is if you can't really talk on speakerphone if you're in a crowded place. Like you gotta you should be respectful of the people around you. Like if you're in line at a fast food restaurant or something like that, we don't all want to hear the conversation that you're having with your mom at that time. You know what I mean? So
I don't even talk on the phone without speakerphone on when I'm in a grocery store. I can't handle it.
Do y'all remember, like it was a while ago now, when that first came out, when those little walkie-talkie push-to-talks?
Oh, the chirps. The chirps.
Yeah, and people were doing them everywhere. All of a sudden, people were in the grocery store just having a personal conversation. You peek around the corner. Excuse me. Yeah. Where do you think you are?
Yeah. Exactly. It's wild. And then people doing voice notes too, voice texts.
Yep.
So they'll just ramble a bunch of words into their phone and then just cuss at their phone because they get the words wrong and send it.
Yep. I text pretty much for every conversation I have, but I will use my actual fingers to text. The only time I'm using talk to text ever is if maybe I have my hands full or something like that. But typically I'm texting with my fingers. So
You're so
for
old fashioned.
for those of you out there who are trying to reach me, if you called and I did not answer, that's why I prefer text message to talking on the phone.
Jesse,
Don't worry, you can call me.
Jonathan has no rules. Jesse has rules about calling him. That's right. What about, so here's one. Can clergy wear purple clergy shirts?
Well, I see. That's an interesting question for me because traditionally Methodists don't wear clergy shirts up until recently. So, like having the clergy with the clergy
and
collar
originally, and then now recently.
Yeah, like so it's been historically like in the late 19th into the 20th century, it was much more suit and tie, or like if it's a woman, it's a a blouse and maybe a scarf. But now the clergy shirt has come back into fashion within the Methodist traditions, and we're still trying to figure out because traditionally purple is the Episcopal color because it is that sort of royal color that goes with that and attaches the episcopacy to more of that royal and holiness color of that. But then we have to ask the question, there's no rule in our discipline around what clergy wear at all in terms of like, there's preference towards alb versus robe in some places, preference towards robe versus suit, or like, but when I preach, I'm wearing shirts like this sometimes. If you're not watching, if you're not watching on YouTube, it's a Hawaiian shirt.
It is a gorgeous Hawaiian shirt.
Yes.
Absolutely. I usually wear the clergy collars, and I hadn't before because I thought there was a rule, kind of unspoken rule, that out of kind of not deference, that's wrong, respect for our Catholic, brothers and their clergy, and that's what they wear, that we don't. But then I learned that was a little bit kind of shaky ground or sandy ground and unstable, and so I did a little research and I found out that it was some of those early Protestants, especially John Wesley, that started to make wearing the clergy collar, a variety of it with the help me, Jonathan.
I'm just going to let you struggle.
Academic robes. Thank you. With the academic robes and having that as opposed to the Catholic alb. And then, of course, it kind of shifted over time. But
it also depends on if you're an academic or if you are, a licensed ordained clergy person versus a lay preacher. And Methodism and early Protestantism has that mix of high educated clergy versus people who are trained for a little bit and just set out into the world to preach. So it's sort of, we're trying to figure out how do we, set apart different people without singling, you're more educated than her, than him, as part about that. Because we also don't want to set that up.
Exactly.
True.
Exactly. So what I typically do, since I'm more often than not, I'm in a contemporary or modern worship setting. So my goal is often to make sure that my attire doesn't seem so fancy or so expensive that the most casual person in the room can't relate, So yeah, I want the most casual person in the room for whatever reason. Maybe they're casual because that's the only real attire that they have. Maybe they're casual just because that's their lifestyle. But I don't want them to feel uncomfortable around me. So I am typically one of the most
Pauline.
People
I've become all things to all people that I might save some.
That's and I learned that from a pastor as well. So that's kind of my own rule.
So we've set up our own sort of ethics around this, each of us, in sort of how we go about doing it, because I generally am going to dress more like sort of business casual, maybe a sport coat unless the air conditioner goes out at one of my churches, and then that. But like in more of the winter months and more of the formal seasons, I may put on my academic robe. Because one, it's purple, which is wild since we're talking about can clergy wear purple stuff. My robe is purple because I went to Garrett, which is partnered with Northwestern in that. So it's got purple as its color. So I wear purple when I do wear my official robes.
Found a loophole. I got you. Well done. Well done. So here's one that I want to start asking you guys a little bit about consequences or kind of personal ones with breaking the rules. So here's one I got. Theme parks, particularly ones that everybody loves to go to in Orlando, and having one of those quick passes, right? so you go through the line faster, right? As opposed to waiting in the long line. And the people who will go up to the quick line, right? Because there's no cutting in line, right? So they go up to the quick line and then they do their little ding and it's red and they go, oh man, I know I signed up for it. And the attendant every time goes, oh, there must have been some mistake. Of course, go on through. And, being a preacher and I'm just kind of listening all the time as I do. And I'm listening to them snicker, right, as they go along going, we did that at the last one too. And I'm thinking to myself going, what are we creating here? So my question is, should we follow the unspoken rules, or kind of rules that maybe aren't quite written, but you can't do it. You're really not supposed to do it because it has consequences, not maybe giant consequences, but could ruin someone's day, several people's.
That's true. So, I mean, when you're talking about situations like that, I guess the way I would land on it, I mean, does anybody really get hurt by that? No, but we're supposed to we're called to be loving to all people and not put ourselves first, and sometimes it's the little things that remind us and others that's important to us, that loving.
How do we care about the little rules that only affect how someone else feels?
Yeah, exactly.
How do we care about those things? I want to say niceties because that kind of makes it trivial.
Well, so I'm thinking about like a kind of a similar example, like, being in line at the grocery store, right? Like, it's for me kind of an unspoken rule that like if the person behind me has significantly less things, if they just have one thing in their hand or a few things, then the unspoken rule is that they go ahead of me. That's just a sign of me saying, I value other people's time as well. I value the people that are around me. It is a first come, first serve type situation, but it's just kind to do that. And I value kindness over, over this.
Maybe
rule
we don't value small acts of unexpected kindness.
And I'll tell you, I mean, if I can imagine, and I've probably been in this situation where if I just have one or two things and the person in front of me notices that and they don't allow me to go, then, it's kind of hard for me not to come up with some ideas about this person's character
there it
in
is.
my mind.
No. Jesse's keeping it real.
And so I would say, it's important. Some of the consequences of not keeping these rules is that, you kind of leave people, and it's not your fault. People have control over their thoughts and their emotions, but like you kind of lead people down this path of like making judgments about you that, we don't want to put people in those situations.
Right. And it discourages, whether we want to believe it or not, discourages people from doing another act of kindness for somebody else.
Exactly.
If Jesse were a lesser person, which we all know he is not, but if Jesse were a lesser man, an experience like not being given the kind of respect he gives others might ruin him. He might go, you know what? I'm just out here for me from now on. I'm out. Exactly. I'm out. I'm not doing this anymore.
Because the idea is origin story, really.
Exactly. Because the idea is that like if I'm sacrificing for others and nobody's sacrificing for me, like who's gonna take care of me? You know what I mean? Like these rules and these things only really work if like we're looking out for each other. If I can trust that others are looking out for me and I'm looking out for them, that's really the only way this really works. If that trust is broken, and I think that's a part of why rules are there. Like there's an authority figure that's hopefully setting up these rules. Like there needs to be this understanding that I can trust that whoever created these rules, whether spoken or unspoken, has all of our well-being in mind, and it's not just creating arbitrary rules.
And that perfectly leads into what happens. Those are those rules that have to get written down, right?
Exactly.
You were kind of moving in that direction. Okay, this gets seriouser and more serious till finally, all right, you know what? We're going to have to write this down. Exactly. Because we no longer can have this understanding, between us. We no longer have this trust. We got to write this down. And it's interesting how that evolves that way, right? And so I wanted to ask, as we move out of conferencing season with so many different rules, Jonathan, we've had a peek in the curiosity about rules. Our rules, what rules we've used to have or currently have, At annual conference, we made some changes. What's a rule that we changed that is going to have significant impact because we wrote it down?
Well, first, we took hats out of the list of things you cannot promote yourself with. But that was funny because it was just an excessive thing. We decided it was redundant. You couldn't use materials to promote yourself. And we also had hats included for some reason.
It's funny because that makes you realize that at some point in the past, somebody tried to get around it by wearing hats.
Yes, as opposed to paper or something, yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, we should get hats with each other's names printed on it just to see. No, so I mean, the actual significant rule that we looked at is working hard to make sure around representation about youth. So one of the realities is that many times at annual conference you will hear there's no young people here, there's no youth here. As part of that, and the youth were frustrated with that, so they approached me as the person who was the chair of the rules committee. I do not get to change the rules as the chair of the rules committee. I'm the one who helps facilitate the process of amending and altering the rules, and these processes of changing the rules go through several conversations. Even if it comes to the floor of annual conference one day, the questions have to go through several groups of people. We have a committee on organization and rules for that reason. We also have conversations with the bishop, with the conference secretary, with other people who are concerned parties to try to make this as equitable as possible so that we're setting up rules to where it's rules that are successful, not rules that are punitive as part of that or restrictive. So what we did was we did vote to allow to have youth on all of the committees, and that the committees need to take into consideration youth schedules whenever they are planning their meetings.
They're required to have a youth now, right?
They are required to have a youth unless the Book of Discipline prohibits it, like the trustees, you have to be over 18 to be on that, or it is recommended by the connectional table that there not be a youth on that committee. Say things like Board of Ordained Ministry, which meets for 2 weeks during the day. There's no real way you can get around that in terms of that. So not having a youth on that currently is the model we will likely follow. But I cannot speak because that is up to the connectional table, not me, because we wrote into the rules different people who have different responsibilities around making sure this goes well.
There you go.
As part of that, not just putting in rules without guidelines attached to them.
I assume, and I say this without complete ignorance, that we're unsure about all the ramifications of this. We're hoping that they're all good, and we think most of them will be, of just forcing that youth vote into spaces where, let's be honest, hasn't always been completely welcoming.
Yes. I mean, and the reality is the benefit of our system, especially at the annual conferences, we can change the rules yearly. That is the benefit. Our rules are not written in stone. We have
rules to change the rules.
What? Yes.
We have rules to change the rules.
Yes, there's a way to amend the rules as part of this. So we have processes for amendment, just like every set of guidelines, bylaws, rules, and structures have ways to change them. We have that way to change them as part of that on purpose. And we don't know if nominations is going to find enough youth, or if but we also have people who are like, oh my gosh, I can nominate youth for things now. Yeah. So that sort of seeing both sides of that is going to be an interesting thing to follow. And it'll be an interesting case study for rules changes in the future to look at how different people that it affects. Nomination, Conference Council on Youth Ministries.
Yeah, the dominoes. And I think they'll be good ones, though.
I think they should be good. I think it's going to encourage us. I think any good rules change is going to encourage us to work towards equity and inclusion, not towards restriction. And that is always my fear whenever people come to change the rules. What are your intentions around wanting to change any structures? Not just, our local annual conference rules, but the Book of Discipline is our book of organization and guidelines and rules for our denomination, not to be restrictive, but to allow for ministry to be successful in contact.
Yes, a foundation, right? Not the end all. It's the beginning. That's right. It's the foundation that we build on.
Yes.
And like you said, there are rules in place to change the rules.
Yes.
When that happens over time. And I think that'll be really cool to see how the dominoes fall with that. And I think, again, there'll be positive ones that we don't even know about yet, just by forcing that young voice to be at the table. I think
we also put in there that we don't just force a young voice to be there. We force that conference entity, committee, team, whatever, to train that youth.
Mm.
We want them to have a mentor on that team to be their advocate and educator in this process. Because in the end, even as adults, when we get put on new committees, we have no idea what's going on sometimes. New teams, new organizations, as part of that, you're like, what do I do? So to have someone to walk you through that and say, hey, this is what we normally do at our first meeting in September. This is what we usually do at our later fall meetings. This is what happens if we have to call a special meeting. Those sort of things.
Well, here's the other thing too. I think this rule that we're talking about, having youth, I mean, this is something that we voted on, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And our understanding,
made the choice.
Exactly. Our understanding is that the folks at annual conference represent the larger body of the conference. And
That's right.
therefore, this isn't necessarily for most people, this isn't a forcing them. This is more of a just a reminder of the importance, I think, of it, and also allowing us to build a system around it too. Right, because now that it's a written rule, now we get to build systems around it. Now we get to say, okay, these, like you were saying earlier, how are we not only going to make sure that we have youth, but how are we going to prepare our youth? And then the result of that is that we have youth that are much more prepared to take up leadership responsibilities after they, when they're not youth anymore, when they're adults. They are much more prepared to be those same people at annual conference in the future, voting for other things, because they have a much more robust understanding. And so, we're making rules maybe to force people who are reluctant, right, and remind those people that these things are important. But I think the fact that these rules are things that we have voted for, and for this rule in particular, folks were excited. Folks were excited that this was even something that we had an opportunity to vote for.
They were cheering on the floor when I brought it up. As at the last, I was like the last order of business that day.
Which usually doesn't get an applause, right?
They told me, you're the last thing. You need to get it. We need to get it done.
Exactly. And people were excited. People were excited to get it done. So so it's not that like we're twisting people's arms. I mean, there might be a couple of people that need their arm twisted, but I think for the large majority of us, we're excited about doing these things, and it's just a reminder for us, and it's a way for us to build a system around what's important to us.
And I think you named something important, that this change to the organization and rules of the conference. And I mean, I think this is, interesting to say we have a plan of organization and rules. Every conference does, every jurisdiction does, because it sets up how we structure things. And what you said there is it's encouraging leadership, it's encouraging formation, it's encouraging discipleship. And if we can celebrate a path to discipleship for young people or for anybody, I mean, that is something, that's worth changing the plan of organization and rules for.
Exactly.
Love it. Jonathan, talk to us about women in ministry. Talk to us a little bit about when that occurred and some of the changes that happened, and then I want to talk about how that has the different things that have spun off from that.
Oh, so who gets to be in ministry is always an interesting thing to talk about in the history of our denomination or any denomination. When our denomination, the predecessor to our denomination, forms in 1784, who gets to vote? White male clergy at General Conference or at the Christmas conference as part of that. And they are deciding who gets to be in ministry, and they do license African Americans, but they don't get a vote to vote on whether or not the others can be part of that. And it gets complicated as part of that. But over time, we have worked to include more people. It's been complicated. It's been painful. There has been dissent. There has been verbal attacks on people, slander and stuff written in organizations against everybody everywhere as part of that. But one of the interesting things about women in ministry is that in the 1880s, a woman who enters Boston University School of Theology, gets her degree, is approved for ministry by her annual conference, I believe. She's approved for ordination by her district, what is now her district committee, but her annual conference and bishop deny it. that goes to General Conference, because we don't have a judicial council at that point. General Conference has that judicial authority, and on that committee, they vote, no, she cannot be ordained in ministry, but there is a minority report. And remember, this is at the time when it's just men, and there are men who are providing a minority report. Yes, as we say, we don't understand. We believe that the orders of ministry are not restricted to one sex or one gender as part of that for all people.
Early sparks.
And you get people like the Francis Willard, who, big in the Prohibition movement, arguing for women in ministry, women being seated as lay delegates as part of that. They were just beginning at that point also to add lay delegates in ministry as part of that. So we're seeing 1880s as a big shifting point in a lot of things. We've already finally allowed for full ordination of Black pastors and the allowance for Black bishops. So we're slowly getting there on that side too. But then we get to the 1950s and we have this explosion of desire for women in ministry. And by 1956, there is a vote. They receive hundreds of petitions. We had to vote. They had to vote on over 1,000 petitions this year around General Conference, how to deal with that this year. Just hundreds on one issue. And they had to sort through. And by the end of that, 1956, women are granted, by changing one sentence, full ordination rights in the denomination as part of that.
And just one sentence
has to change, and women are in ministry. That same year, they're also beginning the work to get rid of the racist central jurisdiction. So it's a big year for equity and justice in our denomination as part of that. So that sort of work is being done. Resolutions get passed. All of these sort of things are happening to promote equity and justice in ministry because people know how to work the rules and how to follow and engage the rules as part of it.
Absolutely. I love it. And you mentioned and women, they're getting full ordination, and women's role in prohibition, which is and you had mentioned which is another rule. It was a little outside I was going to say it's outside our jurisdiction, but it really wasn't, because Methodist women were at the forefront of prohibition. And when it passed, Methodists found themselves in a bit of a pickle because amidst all the chaos, Methodist congregations forgot that they were using wine. And so the sacramental tradition had to change rapidly, and the solution was Welch's grape juice, initially marketed as Dr. Welch's unfermented wine. It became emblematic of a substitute for wine, and we still use it. I still say when the communion stewards are getting the juice, make sure it's Welch's. That's what I was saying.
You see, that's funny because we decided to go local and get a local Muscadine Vineyards grape juice.
Ooh,
part of
like
that,
it.
so to celebrate local agriculture.
Well, you're not a good Methodist, and that's fine. But it's bold of you.
I love the
I'm at the brand. I'm with the brand. Let it be known. Welch's. But that's an example of a rule that, man, it changed everything, top to bottom.
That's such an important thing to note about how when rules are lost, change, it ripples. And we don't always know, like we talked about earlier, we don't always know the consequences of how changes matter and what matters when we change things. What happens when we change things? So like that says, we can't use wine. What do we use? And it gets down to the point of where in 1992, when we release our this holy mystery, our official theology, because we have to vote on official theology. Theology does not come down on high from some sort of fax machine. We decide about, and we actually sent some of our theology of ordination back to the study on ministry and the Committee on Faith and Order to work on it more, because we want a better, more robust understanding of ordination. We did this in 1992 with communion and baptism, and we even put in that work about the recommendations around what you should use for communion in terms of that. We do not mention Welch's grape juice, though, John. It is not in our official doctrine. So it's as part of that
conference next time. Watch out, folks.
But we do now in the United Methodist Church allow for the use of wine again, but also that we pay attention to the ethical reasoning why we may not use wine for people who are dealing with alcohol issues and those sort of things, alcoholism, abuse, or even allergies and reasons they can't have it as part of that. That's why we also, allow for bread that is made from a grain. It does not have to be wheat, because we have people with gluten intolerances.
Right.
As part of that.
And that's an interesting. It's amazing, the Eucharist and Holy Communion, how the rules have changed over the centuries. That's one of the things that changes every few hundred years, sometimes radically. It can go from pure metaphor to pure transubstantiation in the actual body and blood, and then we can fight wars over whether that's true, and all the way to the Methodist understanding of it's kind of both.
Well, and I like what Jonathan was saying about the fact that, you know, it's all these ripples, but I think these ripples happen, at least most of the time, these ripples happen because we are being conscious of the ways that these rules are affecting different people in their everyday lives, right? Because we can't always
the kind of ripples we get.
Exactly, because we can't really we can't really see through every person's perspective, right? And so, you know, over time, as these ripples start to affect people differently, we begin to, you know, create more and more rules, or we begin to adjust or amend the rules that we have in order that other people might be included and not forgotten in all of the rules that we're making. But Jonathan, we're talking about the ripples. Where do these ripples start, though? You know, who are the ones that are making these rules?
Well, I mean, like I said earlier, I mean, it used to be all white male clergy were the ones determining the rules for this. But over time, we have realized, we need to include more and more voices, expand this table more and more, because we want people to actually be from multiple contexts to be able to have a say in how we make decisions. So on every level of conferencing, there is usually a committee on organization and rules as part of that. The general conference has a committee on organization and rules. The annual conference, the jurisdictional conference, I get to chair some of those.
I was going to say, that's your jam.
Yes. So it's a lot of fun to do that. I mean, even local church charge conferences, we have rules set up for that, and local churches even can amend their rules and organization by altering how they go about building their leadership structures, and even their sort of structures about how they just do things within the church as part about that. So the people make the rules, which is, you know, sort of like this lovely idea, but like down in place, we elect committees on organization and rules to help shape these so they can bring suggested amendments to the rules that have been edited over time. Because remember, nothing is in stone in our tradition. We don't have anything except for, you know, the primacy of Scripture, Jesus Christ are the doctrines, and the doctrines can be amended as necessary for language, not for changing of what we believe.
For language,
yes. So that sort of reality is what we can get into about that. But I mean, the main reason the people who change the rules are the people. I mean, and the committees bring it to the various conference entities. And so you saw this happen at our annual conference. We talked about there was a rule submitted to us before, after the rules committee had submitted its rules to be voted on. There was a suggestion coming from the floor. It got talked about. That's how we got youth added to this. At general conference, you saw and this was an interesting one, a call for a land acknowledgement at the beginning of every opening of general conference. And that was an interesting one to see play out, because we are a global denomination, and it was primarily American people who were bringing the subject up of a land acknowledgement of who originally lived on that land. And the rules committee came back and said, why don't you let us study this to come up with ways to depend, no matter where general conference is, we acknowledge the value and the people who have lived on this land, but do it in such a way that it does not always look like an American-centric Native American land acknowledgement. Because if we have this in Europe or in Africa or in Asia, of course there have been indigenous peoples in all of those places, but the language we would use might be different. The language we have engaged with might be different. And the people and so why don't we let the groups who have knowledge around these contexts come together and come up with a better suggestion for opening of the general conference, acknowledging where we are. Because in the end, acknowledging the place we are in is so important too. So even if it's just acknowledging that we are in this country that has experienced this, and this, that sort of thing, beyond that. So sometimes rules get changed quickly. Sometimes we need to say, hey, why don't we study this for a while? That's what happened with our general conference about the study on ministry and looking at the understanding of our theology of ordination. We wanted it sent back because we knew we are shifting as a denomination and allowing for our understanding of ordination to grow. And we talked about this last time with Kim. We don't know what ministry is going to look like in 20 years. So we don't want to set up something that crystallizes ministry to look like it did in 1982 when we're in 2024 right now, and we're going to be in 2050 in 25 years.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, we kind of talked a little bit, like you were saying, the rules are really created by people, right? Yeah. And the rules are amended by people as well. You know, but depending on how important our rules are, right? The ability to change or add or take away rules depends on sometimes greater majorities and lesser majorities, right? So like, for instance, like the Constitution and the general rules can really only be changed with a 2/3 approving vote of annual conference members. And then when you really think about like not just the amount of people it takes, but the amount of time it takes to change something like that, right? As opposed to something that's less denominationally shattering, as adding, you know, youth to committees. And so, you know, we don't want to we don't want to make it seem like, you know, as long as a group of people come together, it's easy to get these things changed, right? As you know, some things are very important and very you know, woven into the fabric of the United Methodist Church.
We require holy conferencing. I mean, to change anything, any part of this, we require holy conferencing. Exactly. Invites an element of the divine into the conferencing participation. That
as well. And so, because
we take the rules very seriously.
We don't want people to go around saying, "Oh, well, you know, a few people decided that, you know, that Mary's not Jesus's mom." So
not in the Methodist Church.
So they just went ahead and changed it. That's not the way the cookie crumbles. There's a lot that goes into this.
That's important to state because assuming that, you know, they're like, I teach Methodist studies, and, you know, there are different people who write about their opinions on the structures and the rules, but they all acknowledge they are not the ones who change the rules. They are providing theological, ethical, spiritual opinions on these things and hoping that their opinion is one of the ones that is heard as the discussion happens around this. But I think one of the most important things is, you know, John says is holy conferencing. And I like thinking of particularly our rules of order. You know, rules of engagement is what my brain wanted to say, as if this is, you know, military war games, but it's our rules of order are designed to help us have these holy conferencing and holy conversations. They are there to make sure that people have voice and vote, that people are heard, and those rules are. So people ask, well, why do we have so many rules or so many structures? Can't we just use this, and this and be done with them? Like, well, we have worked over time to say this is how we best understand how to have these holy conversations around these topics. And yes, sometimes Robert's Rules feels clunky and a little antiquated, and there have been discussions like, what can we do more? But those discussions take time. Like I said, because these are people prayerfully considering, how do we best have conversations? And how do we have 1,000 people have having holy conferencing?
Exactly.
I mean, that's that reality we have to talk about.
So we're holy conferencing in the light of the divine, which, you know, I can't end this topic without talking about, you know, God a little bit.
Yeah.
So we've got unwritten rules, unspoken rules, written rules. God was even so kind as to jot a few of them down, but left the rest of them up to us. What are some, and I'm going to say this, and I understand it's a huge thing to say, what are some God rules? What are some rules that are God's rules that some of our rules emanate from, but God has, and because for specific reasons? Like, let me dare say, thou shalt not kill. There's a story in the Bible, you might have read it, Cain and Abel, right? Cain kills Abel, and the blood literally seeps into creation, and God feels it. It says that creation feels it, like he senses that brokenness. Right?
Yep.
And there are consequences that come from that, including the ground being cursed because that's where the blood was soaked into. for an age. So God has these rules, and then there are repercussions, because there are repercussions. Brother kills brother, there are repercussions. There are ripples, right? There are ripples that go out from that. That's not the end, right, of that story. There are very real consequences that follow you forever, sometimes many times generations later. So what are some of God's rules, what are some of God's rules?
I always go back to, Jesus's summary of the rules of Scripture, which is to love God and love our neighbor. Because the way that I look at it, this is your opportunity to call heresy. if you think I'm looking at this wrong, we're gonna keep our eyes. We're gonna keep our eyes on the comments for any calls for heresy. But the way that I look at it is that all of that we have, all the revelation of God that we have, comes to us through story, right? And we are a part of the continuation of that story, right? The Bible is a huge part of that story. And let me just also say, the Bible is not a rule book.
No.
I remember when I was a kid, my great grandmother, who was also a pastor, she said the Bible is a storybook, and I was like, how can you say that? But it is, right? It is. It's the story of God and God's people.
That's right.
But it's a part of the story, right? It gives us the beginning. It gives us a significant part of that story, but it also gives us a vision of the end of that story, and we are fulfilling a part of of that chapter. And so the ways that we continue to love God and love neighbor, and the different rules and the different ways that we come up in doing that, is our way of continuing God's story, right? And so sometimes the rules that we see in Scripture might take different shapes and different forms, because we are trying to find the best way for us to love God and love our neighbor. But we always go back to Scripture, because Scripture is that source, it's that foundation. And we also we never go to Scripture without calling on the Holy Spirit, because as Christ told us, the Holy Spirit is the source of all knowledge, not Scripture. The Holy Spirit is the source of all knowledge. The Holy Spirit is the reason why we have Scripture to begin with. The Holy Spirit is the only way we can obtain any of the knowledge that we need from Scripture. So we never go to Scripture without the Holy Spirit, but we go to Scripture as our foundation, as sort of like our jumping off point, so that we can continue to love God well and love people well.
Yeah, it's perfectly said. I think about some of God's basic law and some of the more basic ones, and I try to go back to them, and I try to think about which ones have the kind of consequences. And I think of covetousness. I knew I was going to trip over that. It's so broad, but in its broader sense, when we just think about it in its complete, in its totality, we go, oh, well, we all know the consequences. we all know all the consequences. We just know all of the things. Like, oh yeah, I know exactly how I feel when I see somebody that's got something that I like. I know. I don't need to. And it's those natural. God's laws have these natural, immediate. They have natural outcomes, consequences.
I mean, I think that's an interesting way to look at it, but that's only one particular way to look at the ethics of rules around that. Because you're looking at sort of consequence-based sort of thing. What's going to happen if I do this versus, say, virtue-based? How do I am a better person, or how am I more God-like or Christ-like because I choose to live into what Christ has asked of me? I mean, I was teaching, the Beatitudes last night, and we could look at those. They are a lot, not rules. I mean, they're sort of blessed are, but they are ways into discipleships. Discipleship is part, and in fact, I mean, Gustavo Gutierrez will say things like, this is what God expects of you, that you will be blessed by God because you are willing to do these things, to comfort the mourning, to be a peacemaker. And if you're not, then you're not willing to follow Christ as part of that. So that sort of naming the way that we live into our Christ likeness is an important part of that, more so than the strict, say rules that are set up in a particular way. Like Jesse said, story versus guidelines or rules as part of that, living into that.
Yeah, and I think too. I'm not not like Jonathan, in which I can like pull on these specific names of where we get these ideas from. But I also kind of think of the fact that like the way that we are fully human, we are not fully human unless we are working towards being fully Christ, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so and so our rules are the rules and the guidelines in scripture, these stories, they are leading us to fulfilling who we are as humans by allowing us an opportunity to fulfill who we are.
The last other thing that we could talk about there is sort of the teleological realities of like what is the end goal and how we view what the end goal of humanity is, God's creation is, determines how we interpret rules too. As part of that, that happens within if we understand our role as building God's kingdom on earth here versus our role as getting as many people as we can to leave to go to God's kingdom, how we're going to respond to the world is going to be very differently, and how we're going to interpret various rules, laws, and expectations are going to be different.
Exactly.
And the point of it is it being engaged. I think.
Yeah,
exactly.
With all of this stuff is you can be fully engaged in your faith with these rules and the rules of the faith. They are not mutually exclusive things.
Yeah, it's funny. So it's funny that you mentioned that. Like, I think as we kind of talk about like, the fact that our rules are not really, depending on the way that you see the rules, kind of helps you to build your life around them, I think, right? Like the perspective that you're using, like you were saying earlier, Jonathan, like is it something that you're just doing in order for you to get to heaven, or is it something that you're doing in order to make this world a better place, if you will, right? And
yes.
So I think, growing up, I think that there was this kind of idea that parents kind of, you give kids the rules and kids follow the rules just because you're the adult and they're kids, you're the authority, they're not, right? But I think, especially for my I do this with both my kids. My daughter's 6 and my son is 4, but I do this more with my daughter because I think she asks more questions. But I think, rules for her, and I think for everyone, need context, right?
Yes.
So it's not just me telling her what to do, but it's me kind of taking moments to explain to her why we do it.
Yep.
And these rules, for her, these rules are coming, because like you said earlier, the fact that there is a rule means that somebody is breaking it, right?
Often.
And a lot of times with our kids, like we don't necessarily, there are rules that we grew up with that we try to give to our kids, but then there's rules that we have to create on the fly because we see the danger that could come from them participating in certain things. And so my daughter's always asking why, and I take the time to explain why, because I think, like we said earlier, ultimately, when we sit down and we talk together, that makes it's a process of us creating those boundaries together and understanding why those boundaries need to be created. And like I said earlier, my kids need to have this understanding that I have their well-being at heart.
There it is. And
so we need to be, constantly in this conversation about like why these rules are being created. It's not just because dad's tired. It's not just because dad's frustrated, it's because I'm trying to help my kids to at least be on track to becoming fully human, to being, representatives of Christ in the world. And so, a lot of that comes kind of like the Bible gives us our rules and our guidelines. It comes to us through stories. It comes to us in ways that we can relate to.
Yeah.
So it always has to be couched in that context.
Yeah. And Henry, remember there was a couple different things. There's things that like you can't really change. Like Henry, a rule that I can't, no matter what I want to do, it's just the way that it is Henry came up to me one day and he goes, I yelled at him about something, whatever it was. And then he yelled at his sister and he was in trouble for it. And he was talking to his mom, talking to Amy about it. And he goes, well, I have to be just like dad. and my heart
Yep.
just,
Yep.
I was like, that's a rule, Dad. You're telling him he's going like he is. He thinks he's got it. That's a rule. And I don't get to change.
One of those
that.
unspoken
That's
rules,
that I don't get to change. That's true whether I abuse it or not. But the other thing is that I realized a while ago that Henry was getting the wrong message. Just like you were saying, like his understanding was, when do I get to be old enough to tell you when I can watch TV? That's all he was taking from it for a while. It's like he understood, okay, well, being a grown-up means telling people what to do, and you get to decide what other people do. And I was like, it's a kind of. It's far more complicated than that, right? Unfortunately,
and that even gets into human development questions.
Yeah, so all the things. It goes on. We act like when we're 15, we're a totally different person than when we're 20, and in a lot of ways we are. But we still react to rules similarly than we do when we're kids. At least our initial reactions tend to be.
It's about autonomy. Who's in charge of me?
Yeah, that's right. Who's in charge? I want to be in charge.
Who's in charge of me and my schedule and those sort of things? It's like, oh, sure, I could stay up till 3 a.m. because no one's telling me I have to go to bed, but I have to function as a human being the next day.
Yep.
And you learn quickly staying up till 3 a.m. every night and having to be functional at 9 a.m. does not help.
So you make a rule for yourself.
And like you said earlier, it's also kind of based on how are we having these conversations about these rules? Is it like, am I looking at this from the perspective of you need to go to bed early because if you don't, you're going to be really groggy, you're going to be miserable, blah 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 blah. And then it's not that's not one of the ways we look at it, or if that's not the way to look at it. But there's also the way of looking at it and saying, like, if you do go to bed early, then you will be a better functioning human being tomorrow. So it's like, do you want to be, is your motivation to be a better human being, or is your motivation to not be groggy and falling asleep everywhere the next day? You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's different strokes for different folks too. Like some kids, my daughter and my son are totally different. I'll tell you right now, my daughter will be much more motivated if I tell her, if you go to bed now, you'll have a lot more energy for all the crafts and all the playing that you want to do tomorrow. My son needs a different approach. I need to be like, dude, if you don't go to bed right now, you're going to sleep through everything you want to do tomorrow. And it's so for him, it's much more like, it's much more the fear of those consequences. Whereas for her, it's much more the opportunities that she gets to be involved in if she takes part in this rule. So, it's different strokes for different folks.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Amy likes a boundary. Like she would go into a classroom first day of school and gets a syllabus, and that's magic for her. And all of a sudden, a box, like they just gave her a box to be in.
Exactly.
Perfect. And I'm the total opposite. I'm getting that thing and I'm going, golly, how can I fudge this?
Exactly.
I'm trying to move things around. I'm like, this is never going to work. I got to do this and that. And it feels constricting. And it's amazing how we hear things.
Yep.
Differently. Jonathan, I saw you when you said that when I get a syllabus, I cringe. You're like, what? Syllabuses are gold.
Well, no one reads a syllabus anyway, so it's fine.
Amy does.
Except for Amy.
Except for Amy.
Immediately.
Yeah. Amy is the only one keeping syllabi alive.
Notes in the margins of it. Oh, yeah.
But it's that sort of that understanding of like, I noticed that neither of you said that I tell my kids to go to bed because I said so. Like, there's none of that.
That's because we got told that growing up, and we were like, nah, we're not doing that.
Exactly.
I want you to go to bed because I need at least a half an hour to reset myself.
That's back of our minds.
Yeah.
Well, because all that really leads to is as soon as you get out of the house, some people are going to go to college, some people won't. But like as soon as you get out of the house, you're like, well, I'm not doing that because nobody's there to tell me.
That's right. If it's just been mom and dad's rule.
And now you have to learn that rule the hard way all over again because now you're outside of that authority. So it's better for me to teach my kids something that they can grow from instead of me trying to teach them something that they're going to have to reteach themselves just because that authority figure is nowhere around.
Well, and it also sets up that sort of like that setup for like chores as a child. Like you're helping because I told you to versus you're helping because one, you're part of this family, and two, you're going to have to know how to wash clothes. You're going to have to know how to cook food or to that you should take the trash out to the dumpster, to the cans or wherever you're dropping your trash at. And so it's that sort of setting up, just practices for life that can be tweaked. Yes, your bedtime is not going to be 7:30 for the rest of your life. But setting the standards, like,
time.
I need to know how much sleep I need, what boundaries I need, those sort of things. And, depending upon what's my day look like tomorrow, when do I have to be functional as a human?
Exactly.
There you go.
It's part of that. Well, some days it's 7:30, some days in the morning, some days it's not until 2 p.m. that I have to encounter people.
Exactly. Well, and that's the important thing too. It's like, it's reminding them in these conversations that it is about the way that you're encountering people, right? It's not, you're not sleeping just for you. I mean, it's very important for your for your well-being, but you also want to be a functioning human being in society, right? We don't do chores just because I said so, because you're a part of this family, right? You do chores. So, and I think too, I mean, exactly. I mean,
there's a law there.
That's right. There is a
written rule. There is a written rule there, but I think too, like, even explaining the written rules to our kids, like, there is a written rule that you go to school, but that's because as a society we have decided that education is important for the development of the entire nation, right?
Yes.
So that when John and Jonathan and Jesse get old and they can't take care of themselves, we can trust that we have
educated
raised
people taking care of us.
Exactly. We have raised another generation of educated people that are taking care of us. And I think too, like, grounding all of our rules in this community, in this bigger story, leads us back to our conversation about, the decisions and the rules that are happening in our holy conferencing too.
Yeah.
Right.
And isn't that the history of it? Is who makes the rules is dependent. It kind of depends on whether you want to follow them or not. If you feel like whoever they are, making the rules instead of us.
Exactly.
That can make the whole difference.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's us that make, even though I'm not physically present, it's a representation of who I am. So, somebody that's there, somebody that I trust is making those rules for me and for my well-being and the well-being of our community. I think it kind of helps us to feel like we're a part of this larger story. And so by us doing our part, following those rules, right, gives those folks a better opportunity to make better rules. Because if I'm going to follow the rules exactly the way that they're written, and then I come up into a situation and I'm like, well, it's actually not working, then I know who to go to and say, hey, I think we need to revise it because I tried it and it doesn't work. Instead of me just saying, oh, it doesn't work, and then moving on and doing my own thing and not being in conversation with the larger community and saying, like, that's just
where Jonathan shows up with a cape and a rule book. Like, I got you.
Exactly. Exactly. And then he can say, hey, like, I recognize that you were really trying to follow this rule, but you missed this, like, this really important detail. Because Jonathan was at annual conference, right? While that rule was being made, while that rule was being voted on, while those petitions were being raised. And Jonathan can say, like, when you read it, you thought this was the important part, but this detail right here is actually the really important part. Yeah. And so we're always kind of in conversation. And then you can say, okay, well, that detail that you were focusing on, we thought when we raised those petitions, we thought that would have been an issue, but it's actually not.
Then we hold a conference, and it turns out
this is actually the issue. So let's go back and kind of reframe the way that we're looking at this.
I mean, and that's the reality. Russ Ritchie, famous Methodist historian, talks about how we don't set ourselves up as people of rules as Methodists. We don't set ourselves as people of structure. Predominantly, we are people of testimony and community and story. And so our rules and our organization, our book of discipline and book of resolutions are more just how we tell our story.
They emanate from those things as opposed to the other way around. Yeah,
exactly.
And I think exactly. And as we've said in several episodes, we're watching the need for change emerge rapidly. I mean, over the next 4 to 8 years as a denomination, we get to make some really interesting choices around our structures. I think, talking about the opportunity to change how we understand Episcopal leadership, how we understand what appointments look like. All of that is going to be rich and beautiful, and we have set ourselves up to be successful by having organization rules plans that can be flexed by the people.
Yep.
Amen.
I think that's a beautiful way to end it.
Absolutely.
I think that's
Absolutely.
it. So,
all right.
I want to encourage our listeners to consider how history informs our current practices, how our current practices are in the context of a larger story, not just a story of our annual conference, not just a story of our communities, but also the larger story that God God's larger story, and the ways that we are living into the image of Christ in the ways that we set up guidelines, and we set up boundaries, and we set up rules so that we can love God well and love our community well. I want to also invite our listeners to continue to engage with the complex interplay of tradition and change in Christianity. We need to do this as a people, as a community. Yes. So we need more people to be engaged. If you feel like these rules aren't working for you, the only way that these rules can be changed so that they do work for you is if you engage with us. Let us know. Let Jonathan know so that he can take that to the floor.
Just Jonathan.
Just Jonathan. Nobody else.
Signal.
Exactly.
Nobody else. He'll come.
No, but really, I do get emails and questions all the time. I get calls and messages on Facebook about, like, what does this mean? Why is this thing here in our book of discipline, in our plan of organization? Mm-hmm. Why is this a tradition here? And is this a rule or a tradition that we have as part of that? And why is that tradition there? And is it worth breaking that tradition?
Exactly. So just remember that we're not alone. None of this is happening in a vacuum. We are all parts of the body of Christ, and we are living into that in the ways that we make rules, change rules, amend rules. It's all for the glory of God, and continue to pray that the Holy Spirit is a part of that, because that's where all of our wisdom and all of our comes from anyway. So thanks for listening. Continue to listen to the podcast, continue to download it wherever you get your podcasts, and continue to engage with us in comments and
rate and
emails, review, do all that stuff. Share the podcast with all of your friends. And
feel free to clip out pieces of it you think are hilarious and post them as reels and
Jonathan anytime you want.
Exactly.
Already several memes, so it's fine.
Exactly. And if you think it's an hour is too long, listen to us at 2 times speed. If you think that Jonathan's talking too fast, slow it down. It's all good. It's
I
all
only
love.
have 1 speed, so I'm sorry, y'all.
But until next time, we'll see you soon.